were a lot of mysterious processes that my team and I have had to unravel over the past 2 weeks that were implemented by the previous White House and in particular the previous press shop here. And so I can commit to a greater access and transparency, which I believe we already have by ensuring that the 440 journalists whose credentials were revoked will be reinstalled. They will get their credentials if they wish to. We've also, of course, opened up a new seat to new media. And as far as open press events here at the White House, if we tell you it's open press, it's open press. Well, to answer your question in one swoop, I will say that President Trump is committed to lowering taxes for Americans and cutting taxes for Americans. As for congestion pricing in New York, I do know that the president spoke with Governor Hochul about that. I don't have any, actions, so to speak, to read out for you on that issue today. Number two, when it comes to no taxes on tips and Social Security, the president has made it very clear to our allies on Capitol Hill that is a critical piece of this reconciliation package, and he expects that his tax cuts from 2017, which put a lot more money back into the American people's pockets, those must be implemented, and no tax on tips. The president is intent on delivering on that promise, and he will get it done. I think Americans who are concerned about increased prices should look at what President Trump did in his first term. He effectively implemented tariffs, and the average inflation rate during the first Trump administration was 1.9%. In fact, when President Trump left office, it was 1.4%. So President Trump is going to do everything he possibly can to cut the inflation crisis that the previous administration imposed on the American people, and he will continue to effectively utilize tariffs. That's a hypothetical question, and the president is intent on ensuring that he effectively implements tariffs while cutting inflation and costs for the American people. And, the media has this way of just looking at everything in a microscope rather than looking at the whole of government economic approach that this president is taking. He will effectively implement tariffs. He's also, as I just answered Prince Stephen's question, committed to tax cuts. He's also clearly committed, as evidenced by his executive orders, to unleashing the might of our energy industry, which we know will eventually drive down inflation, and all the other economic measures that this president has made will have a Trump incoming economic boom, just like we saw in our first term. The president is going to implement those tariffs tomorrow, and he will respond to Mr. Trudeau's comments in due time, I am sure.
What type of things have to happen? What does the administration need to see in order to avoid those tariffs?
Well, the tariffs are incoming tomorrow on Canada, and the reason for that is because both Canada and Mexico have allowed an unprecedented invasion of illegal fentanyl that is killing American citizens and also illegal immigrants into our country. In fact, I have more language for you right here. Canada, Mexico, and China, which, as I mentioned, President Trump will implement a 10% tariff on China, have all enabled illegal drugs to pour into America. The amount of fentanyl that has been seized at the southern border in the last 2 years alone has the potential to kill tens of millions of Americans. And so the president is intent on doing this, and I think Justin Trudeau would be wise to talk to President Trump directly before pushing outlandish comments like that to the media. You're interrupting your colleague, but sure.
Sorry, I thought you called on me.
I called on Lindsay.
To offer a window into that.
Yeah, the president based that statement on truth because it is truth and it's fact, and it was relayed to him by the authorities who are overseeing the investigation into this horrific plane collision. And the president, as I said in my opening remarks, continues to be briefed on the collision by everybody across his cabinet, the Secretary of Transportation, the Secretary of Defense, the NTSB, who the commissioner there was in the Oval Office with him yesterday. Yeah, kudos to John Ratcliffe for revealing that truth and that fact to the American people. Many years too late, the Biden administration had a chance to let the American people know the truth about that, and for some reason, they chose not to. I also would just like to point out that several years ago, when I was working in this press shop and President Trump would take to this podium to brief the American people on COVID-19, he suggested that COVID very well may have came from a lab in Wuhan, China. And many members in this very room mocked him for that, said he was spewing conspiracy theories. He was not. We now know that to be the confirmable truth. It took many years for it to come out, but the president was right in this instance again. I have not been present for Secretary Rubio's conversations with President Trump about the Panama Canal. I have been present for President Trump's own thoughts on the Panama Canal, and you've all seen them as well in his public statements that he has shown. He believes it's unacceptable that the canal is essentially run by the Chinese Communist Party. If you look at both ends of the canal, massive Chinese Communist Communist Party linked companies run the canal. That's unfair to the American people, many of whom lost their lives many years ago building this canal. The American taxpayers are paying millions of dollars for the canal, and the president believes it's in our national interest as a nation for Secretary Rubio to go there and begin these discussions, and that's exactly why he's doing that.
Caroline.
Sure. The president was asked and answered this question yesterday, and he, as the commander-in-chief of the United States military, reserves the right to review troop deployments overseas at any point in time. Well, the president is intent on ensuring that we are increasing staffing at these agencies, and that's why he signed a very strong executive order on his second day in office, immediately terminating DEI hiring practices at the FAA. He also following, I think we all know the answer to that question, and as President Trump said yesterday, it's common sense. Had Secretary Duffy here yesterday at the White House at this podium saying that he is on it, and we can all trust that he definitely will be. I don't have details on this. It's a private meeting. It will take place at 2:30 p.m. I'll try to get there in time, and I can let you know after. How's that?
In terms of standing it up. And of course, this has happened before during the Clinton administration.
Yeah, that's right.
Detainees of Cuban and Haitian descent were both detained at Guantanamo. Are you looking at that model in setting up this detention facility?
Secretary Hegseth, I believe, was on television this morning answering this question, and he said that the Department of Defense is already on it. He has directed his agency to ensure that Gitmo is increasing their capacity for beds, and that's exactly what President Trump's executive order did. It directed Secretary Hegseth and also Secretary Noem to expand the Migrant Operations Center at the Naval Station to provide for this extra detention space. And as Secretary Hegseth confirmed this morning, that operation is underway. Yes.
Whether there might be some lead time.
Yes.
And are those...
At this point, the president has made it very clear those tariffs are going to be implemented and in effect. If the president at any time decides to roll back those tariffs, I'll leave it to him to make that decision. But starting tomorrow, those tariffs will be in place. Sure.
Thanks, Caroline.
Yes, sure. I have not seen that report about the Prime Minister. I can go check back with our friends at the National Security Council and get back to you on that. I can confirm that Prime Minister Netanyahu will be here on Tuesday of February 4th for a working meeting and visit with the president, and I'm sure you will all be here, very excited to cover that visit.
The Guantanamo Bay subject, specifically, obviously.
Well, it's a really good question, and the memorandum that he signed, the order that he signed, builds on his previous executive actions, obviously, to secure our southern border and deport illegal criminals from the interior of our country. We know that we have an issue with detention space here in the interior, which is a big reason why Congress needs to pass this reconciliation package as quickly as possible to ensure that DHS and ICE have the funding they need to detain these individuals that the administration is very swiftly rounding up and deporting, arresting and deporting these illegal immigrant criminals. And so the president feels it's an appropriate place. Taxpayers are already funding it. The space is there. Why not use it? And the Secretary of Defense, as I said, is working on that as we speak. Sure. Yes. Yeah, I think it's very interesting that Democrat officials in these cities who have been completely overrun and overwhelmed by illegal immigrant criminals would refuse support and help to cure this problem that has especially taken over their cities. I guess they don't want to admit they've been wrong with their sanctuary city policies. I'm not sure. You'll have to ask them about their intentions. But they would be very wise to comply with this administration because this administration is hell-bent on enforcing our nation's immigration laws. And this administration will continue to arrest and detain and deport illegal migrant criminals. And what we won't do is defy our nation's immigration laws like the previous administration who had these orders of removal on illegal immigrants across the country and were refusing to execute on them. We will continue to remove illegal criminals from our nation's interior. I would certainly think so. I'd have to check back on which specific law they're violating, but certainly if they're not enforcing our nation's immigration law, sounds like they are breaking the law. And I would also add that their constituents don't approve of that. You've seen residents in Chicago show up at their city council meetings infuriated with their leadership in that city because they are working very hard to provide for their families. They want public safety and law and order, and their officials have abandoned those very basic American principles in these cities. And the American people want law and order. It's, again, an overwhelmingly popular policy to deport illegal criminals from our nation's interior. barrier in this administration will continue to affect that goal. Sure. When did the Colombian president make those remarks? Okay. I will share those with the President of the United States, and I will get back to you on his response. Sure. I haven't spoken to the president about the COVID origins specifically in regards to any actions he may or may not take when it comes to China, but as I have previewed quite a few times today, he will be implementing a 10% tariff on China tomorrow. Sure. Hi.
The government.
I won't get ahead of the president on tariffs when it comes to the European Union. What I can tell you, again, is that the president will be implementing 25% on Canada, 25% on Mexico, 10% on China tomorrow for the reasons that I have repeatedly laid out in this briefing. Newsmax, go ahead. Yes.
Thank you so much.
No, the gentleman behind you.
James Rose,
Yes.
thereafter. First, on...
I think the president has actually made his position on Iran very clear, and he made that clear when there were the negotiations about the ceasefire, which we know obviously is now in place, and the deadline on that ceasefire has continued. He said that Hamas and Iranian-backed terrorists would have hell to pay if that ceasefire didn't move forward, and then quickly thereafter it did. I also do have news on the hostage front, which I'm very surprised nobody asked about this because it is big news story, and the White House applauds the release of 8 additional hostages from Hamas captivity, thanks to the ceasefire deal secured by President Trump. 3 Israeli and 5 Thai nationals are being reunited with their families and their loved ones after being held in unspeakable conditions for over 15 months. And the president remains committed to the release of all remaining hostages, and they should have never been taken by the brutal terrorist group Hamas in the first place. And I think President Trump's working meeting with the Israeli Prime Minister next week emphasizes his continued support for Israel in ensuring that brutal terrorists in that region have hell to pay. Sure, absolutely not. As I made it very clear, former ambassador and now special envoy Rick Grinnell is going to Venezuela with 2 very clear directives. Make sure that Tren de Aragua members, of which there are 400 currently in custody, are repatriated back to Venezuela, and that all United States detainees return home. Thank you very much, guys. I think one of the things that the American people love most about this president is that he often says what they are thinking, but sometimes lack the courage to say themselves. And I think yesterday at this podium, you heard President Trump express great frustration, perhaps even anger, with the previous administration's policies, many of which have led to the crises that our country is currently facing and that this president is focused on fixing. Thank you guys very much. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week.
Travel next week, Carolina?